Hi? I really wanted my next video to be light, but there's been something, I guess you could call it a theory, I've been raring to talk about. And I have on Tumblr before I got suspiciously terminated for like 17 hours or so, but I figured a video would be a better way to display my thoughts. So here we go. Back in October, I made a video about Tere, her gender identity, and how that identity could be explored in the show. Though my opinions on some of the approaches have changed, I still have a sort of pride, for the video. At the time I made this video, the fact Terra was trans made me really happy, and brought me a lot of comfort. But the more I thought about her presence in the show, the more my feelings started to shift into something more negative. If you know anything about Disney, you'll know that they've gotten a lot of shit for this pattern they have of censoring and erasing trans representation, specifically transfem representation. The biggest examples of this erasure came out in late 2024, with Brooklyn from Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, and Kai from Win or Lose both having their identities, and episodes relating to those identities, stripped from them. And, while Terra never had an episode confronting her identity that got cut, in terms of gender at least, there was still a lot of cutting that leads me to believe Terra is yet another trans girl that got her transness ripped away by Disney. Before I really get into this, let it be known that Terra is not the only member of the main cast that is or was supposed to be trans. Cousin Bud was originally going to have a storyline where he figured out he was non-binary, which I am also angry about losing, and Nellie was labeled as cishet for now, implying she may figure out some things about herself in the future, but Terra was the only primo that had already transitioned. So, while in theory we have two trans characters with plenty of screen time to spare, it's only the ones that don't actually know it yet, so I still find it to be unfair. So, let's actually talk about it, right? Balancing screen time is a pretty hard thing to do when you have a stacked cast like Primos does. Though I do believe some characters could have more time to themselves, the show generally does a pretty good job at giving each Primo and the other cast members their fair share of screen time, with the exception of Tere. Tere suffers from a lack of screen time, despite being part of the most iconic sibling group of the cast, which does get quite a lot of attention put on it. She doesn't have all that much development. Her total screen time caps out at just a few minutes short of an hour, and this is all including background appearances, drawing/art of her done by Tere, flashbacks to previous episodes/reused clips, and cut episodes. If we look at her individual lines across all the aired episodes, we'll see that she only has 113 lines, give or take. And a lot of these lines are under 5 words long, which is pretty bad for a member of the main cast. Obviously, she's not the character of the least lines. She's not even the primo of the least lines. But being in the bottom 3 with a toddler who can only say her own name and a literal baby isn't a good sign for a fully verbal teenager. Part of this may be the fact that she is the only character in the main cast that doesn't have an episode centered around her, or at least an episode where she receives major, independent focus. She would have if the show had enough budget to not have to cut 2 episodes, I'll get to that in a bit, but she doesn't. Closest she has to having a primary role in an episode is Summer of Santa Tabi, but she has to share that role with Tonita, and the episode, as the title suggests, has a plot that revolves around Tabi. Speaking of Tabi and Tonita, as the only character in the cast that doesn't have an episode centered around her suggests, Tabi and Tonita have episodes in which the plot centers around them, and that gives them extra bits of character development. The two of them also have a decent presence outside of these episodes, Tabi being important in Summer of the 13th Primo and Summer of La Iguana as a member of the older Primos, which Tere should be as well as the 5th Primo out of 15, and being a maximum of 2 years younger than Tabi, but whatever, and representing/taking the lead in most of T's sisters' screen time as the eldest and de facto leader, whilst Tonita is used very frequently for random lines, bits, and jokes because of her dynamic and colorful personality, allowing her to create a lot of entertainment. Tonita being closer to Tere than a lot of other primos also helps her with securing that sweet, sweet screen time, which is actually another important thing. Though the T-sisters' whole gimmick is that they're super similar and attached at the hip, Tabi and Tonita are allowed to have time on screen without their sisters, also being allowed to have dynamics outside of them. Tere doesn't get either. You'd think that a trio of girls so similar would get similar treatment and attention, but they don't. Tabi and Tonita have both been given time to be their own people. Meanwhile, there isn't a single moment in the show where Tere isn't accompanied by at least one of her sisters. Any screen time she had for herself or with other characters was cut. Compare that to the other sibling groups. Besides the Ramirez Humphreys, a sibling trio which contains a baby with little to no personality yet and the literal protagonist, the siblings all have a good balance of screen time separate from each other. Even Nachito has more individual screen time, and his whole gimmick is that he worships Big Nacho. So it feels really fucking iffy to me that the one sibling group that has a currently trans sibling in it is so imbalanced. Even more so because the sibling that brings down that balance is the trans one. Like, I can't be the only one who finds that suspicious, can I? Now, Tere did have potential to have much more personal development and attention before the crew were forced to go back and edit every episode because of the controversy. She had 2 established interests unique to her, Tere had her own opinions on her, and she had a clear dynamic with Chacha and Lucita. But because of the aforementioned controversy, this potential was wasted, and her only times in the spotlight were flushed down by the corporate shitter. Now, her episodes being cut isn't as abysmal as the removal of episodes like The Gatekeeper, but it's a pretty weird coincidence that the 2 episodes that got cut just so happened to be episodes that had segments largely focused on the designated trans girl of the series, and even worse considering the quality of the contents of each of the segments. Most would assume that the cut episodes would be ones that add little value to the story and are just kinda mediocre, but they're not. If you've watched the cut episodes and the actual show, you'll know they're not. I love Primos. It's a huge comfort show for me, and I'm forever grieving its cancellation, but there are a lot of episodes that are just kind of meh. So it baffles me that so many of these episodes/segments that managed to make the cut over the 4 segments that didn't. All 4 cut segments are phenomenal, in my opinion. I've talked about Terra's episodes, Summer of Mariposa and Summer of Inheritance, to death. Not on here, but I have. But Summer of El Collab and Summer of Fotos y Recuerdos are absolutely brilliant as well. Both of the non-Terra segments give further insight on the Humphrey sister dynamic, Summer of El Collab also giving Baby Bud some time in the spotlight, which is a very important dynamic within the show, so it feels weird that they would be cut. Some of the segments have some pretty damn good messages/themes/whatevers in them. El Collab is about teamwork and inclusion, Inheritance is about being proud of your features and that everyone has something special about them, Fotos y Recuerdos is about what inspires/drives you, not giving up, seeing the positive in the negative, and jealousy to some extent, and Mariposa is about insecurity? It doesn't have as clear or specific of a message as the others do, but it's a beautiful and emotional episode, especially at the end. Plus, both episodes contain some of the better songs in the show. So how come they didn't make it through? There's loads of episodes that could have been sacrificed in place of these ones. In fact, here's a list of segments I feel are lackluster or unnecessary and could easily be removed from the show without losing anything of substance. Summer of Los Bots. Summer of Pam, it's kind of like Summer of Inheritance, but instead of looking for a better special feature, she's removing something she previously thought was a special feature. Summer of Hacienda Chills, Summer of La Hamaca, Summer of the Baby Races, Summer of El Demo, Summer of El Chupal Cabra. Heavy on the clip show episodes. I really don't see the point in them. There could be a reasonable explanation behind the cuts. I mean, the cuts were done for budget purposes. They had to pay for all the reanimation and re-recording of the already completed episodes somehow. Wait, actually, how many of the episodes were fully completed before they had to be redone? Are there fully animated versions of the cut episodes out there somewhere? If so, this makes this infinitely worse. I would wager that the problem lies in more complex animation segments, by Primo standards at least, based on some of the storyboards, but the fact both of the episodes had segments that heavily featured Terra in them really rubs me the wrong way. I don't know, maybe I'm looking too far deep into this, but knowing Disney, it's not a completely unreasonable thought to have. And even if this Terra screen time conspiracy doesn't check out, at the end of the day, she's still a trans character who has basically no screen time compared to her cisgender family members. I mean, come on, why did the literal fucking baby get an episode but not Terra? Plus, there's still the fact that Terra being trans is a really niche piece of knowledge. Terra was supposed to be trans. It says so in the T-Sisters character sheet. It's stated twice. There's clear indication that this information was going to be hinted at within the show, and hell, they even gave her a dead name, though it may be even more dead since she swapped names with Tabby. I don't know. They probably weren't going to make a super big deal out of it, like they would have done with Cousin Bud's gender identity arc. Natasha writes that they can reference her past life in the series when we see old photos of the family. But they weren't even able to do that! The literal bare minimum. The average viewer probably wouldn't even be able to notice. Terra's transness, something that would be a pretty fucking big deal in her life, goes completely unacknowledged. You wouldn't even know it was a thing unless you went digging for the character sheets. It is so easy to include representation for things like this in the show, and the show very obviously understands that. One of the main points of the show is to represent minority groups, and the show has done that really well, particularly with the Latina and neurodivergent rep. And I'm sure they would have done well with the trans rep as well. I mean, we've already seen some of what they can do in terms of LGBT representation for Summer of Heart Eyes, which confirms Lita is M-spec, and Alex, the coworker she falls in love with, is also non-binary, though I assume most translations made them a guy. The Polish dub did that, unfortunately. Considering each character sheet had a segment dedicated to gender identity and sexuality, I'm sure the crew would have been willing to do so much more, but Disney most likely stopped them from getting too queer with Lita and Alex, and, well, obviously they didn't let them include Terra and Cousin Bud as the trans kid they were supposed to be. There's so much you can do to explore these topics. I literally have a whole video where I share ideas of how you could confirm trans Tere within the show. You know what would have been better than 2 clip show episodes? An episode where the Primos look through a bunch of old stuff they find in Buelas and Pops' attic, letting us get a glimpse into each character's childhood, expanding on lore, and letting us see Tere pre-transition, thereby letting people know she's trans without having to look through old production stuff. God, it just pisses me off so bad. Money and right-wing snowflake outrage is the one thing that's stopping us from getting the representation that we deserve. I would hope that one day maybe Primos could get renewed, and the crew would finally be allowed to do what they wanted with Terra and Cousin Bud. Although, considering the current political climate in the US, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Well, there's always fanfiction.